Everybody, thank you for joining me today. We are celebrating the artist Colin Reid from the UK today, and it's an honor to have him here joining us today. Um, we are just returning from Florida. We were down there for our Glass Coast weekend. We did the Shelly Ellen Zoom from down there, many of you saw. And now that we're back in full swing, we're getting ready for our big event coming up in April. So without further ado, I'm going to mute everybody. Mute yourself, Colin, so I'll click on that. While you do that, I'll start taking over everybody's screen. Let's go here. All right, cool. You should be seeing my, I guess I call this a logo screen. So we're starting our plan for our April auction. I have some pieces set aside for our auction coming up April 28th during our I guess it's our 50th Glass International Exhibition celebrating the Year of Glass. Here's some great pieces to be sold. There was some amazing activity on these things, especially Jenny Ruffner's work. Sold Lubinsky. So if you have anything or keep thinking of consigning, contact me. I'll run over the details with you. The Glass Coast Weekend website is still online. If you haven't seen it yet, I'm sure many of you have. It's a great exhibition celebrating great website celebrating three exhibitions, which are, as we discussed before, Aquatica, the Glass Ceiling, and Shelly Allen's exhibition. It was a great time in Florida. Think about coming next year. Live and in person in April. So our next big get together is in April as we celebrate our Year of Glass. So, which is so funny about this, and I don't know if this is good or not, but if you know the Year of Glass website, which is in the bottom of your page, which is iyog22.org, goes to the Year of Glass site. Well, no one bought the .com, so I figured I would do it. I own the .com, so now on the yearofglass.com page, you can go to our website, which will be promoting the Year of Glass for the glass arts, and the regular Year of Glass site promoting glass as a medium of science and all the other aspects we use in our life. I'm putting together details now. Invitations will be sent out soon. So last weekend in April, put in your calendars. Shelly Allen's show Harbor is online still on artsy.net. If you haven't seen it yet, it's an amazing collection of her work. She is so talented. We're honored to have her here in our family. Also, we're starting to get more requests for Habatat Verified. And what that is, it's a certificate that goes along with the artwork that you purchased that verifies it as either it's done by the artist, keeps a history track of what the artwork is from, where it's been, and it's actually logged into our server here at the computer. So some people had wanted something better than just an appraisal or a certificate, and this is actually logged in our servers saying who bought it, when, and it actually is made by that artist. So there'll be more details about this soon. There is a cost, but if you want to know more, let me know anytime. All right, that's enough of me. So I am going to welcome Colin Reid. Colin, I'm going to try to unmute you again. So go ahead and click the unmute button. There you go. Say hello to everybody.
Hi, hello everybody. Thank you for being here, and thanks Aaron and Habitat Galleries for inviting me to talk about my work. It's an honour. So first, as Aaron was saying, first of all, we're going to start with a video. In 2013, I had a retrospective exhibition at Cheltenham Museum and Art Gallery, it was really quite a highlight of my career. It was a collection of, I think, 56 pieces, mostly borrowed from museum collections and private collections, and with a book. And they also made a video, which was shot over a few months in my studio. So it was basically what was happening in my studio over that time, and it gives quite a good insight into how the work is made, what's happening. So I thought that it's a good way to start as an introduction to my work.
All right, so we'll start with the video. Everybody sit back and relax. I've seen this video. The first time I saw it was actually at U of M Dearborn. They played the video for me, and I was taken aback. It was such a great produced piece. So enjoy. Here we go.
Glass it's a material that we've had in human society for 4,000 plus years. I think it's got a lot of integrity as a material. It's just a tremendously versatile material. I mean, it's something we're surrounded by all the time. As a material to actually take note of and start to work with, it's really interesting. It's great because you can approach it in so many ways, because it melts, and so you can cast it and you can blow it and you can stretch it, and you can form it in so many ways. And then you can also work it cold, so it's like, as well as being able to melt it, you can work it as if it was stone. But it's also very unforgiving. If you make a false move, you'll crack it or break it, and then you can't fix it. So there's a kind of tension always around working with it. It's such a ubiquitous material that surrounds us all our lives, and most people know really very little about it. Well, I studied fine art originally, went to St Martin's, and but it wasn't the right course for me, so I dropped out of the fine art, and I was in Brixton Labour Exchange one day looking at a list of government training courses that was up on the wall. Down at the bottom it said scientific glass blowing, and I just thought, what's that? That sounds interesting. Never occurred to me that you could do stuff with glass, and so I applied for the course and I got on it. I always had kind of the idea that I'd learn the skill and then I'd use it to make my own work, so I'd use it in a more creative way than making lab equipment. I fairly quickly decided that I wanted to work with casting rather than hot glass. I kind of honed in on certain qualities of the technique. It enables you to work on the interior space of the glass as well as the outer form. I started experimenting with veiling, which is a kind of smoky effect. It's a product of how the glass flows when it's liquid, and it's basically telling the story. It's showing how the glass behaved when it was molten and it flowed into that particular form. That's a quality that I've been interested in ever since, really, and I think it's one of the great things about glass, that because it's a transparent material. You've got both the possibility of working with the outer form, you've also got interior space. It's really got another dimension compared to other materials, I feel. I want a sort of a fairly thin wax that I can bend and manipulate. Cut it up, shape it, and using heat and melt it and put together basically the finished form that I want to end up with in glass. Then I make a refractory mould, it's a plaster-based mould. It looks like a plaster of Paris mould, but it's got plaster in it to sort of stick it all together, but it's got other materials so that it will withstand the temperature of the kiln. And then the wax is melted out, polystyrene or everything else all sort of carefully removed from the mould, and it's all cleaned up. And then that goes into the kiln with a block of glass in it, or a couple of blocks of glass, depending on what sort of I want to end up with. And it's slowly taken up to casting temperature. The actual casting is fairly quick. It just takes a couple of hours for the glass, once it's melted, to fully fill the mould. Most of my pieces, it's probably another 2 to 3 weeks of cooling. If you don't cool it slowly enough, then you end up with permanent stress in it and it's liable to crack. And then once it comes out of the kiln, the mould is broken away and the glass is taken out, and then there's a lot of grinding back and polishing and sandblasting, and which is also pretty time consuming, until I end up with the finished piece. I can change it quite a lot at that stage. I might saw it up, much more radically than I perhaps intended to. If I'm not happy with it, I want to change it. I can do a lot more to it. It's not absolutely fixed, but from then on, all the process of the cold working technique. what I realised was that you can get total internal refraction. If the light reflects off the inner surface, a polished surface of glass at a certain angle, it bounces back, so it acts like a mirror. And so you get these extraordinary kind of refractive properties in the glass, which I fairly quickly realised that that was a possibility and that it offered yet another kind of dimension. I've utilised that and played with it and experimented with it really ever since. Over the years I've had a lot of different assistants working for me, and I've had some really, really great people actually who've gone on to be most successful names in British glass. So I'm very feel very proud of that, and I'd say it's been very important to me. For the last 8 years I've had Karen Brown. I hand over a lot of the mould making, the sort of more kind of technical aspect of making the pieces to her. In the 90s, I started working with optical glass. Optical glass is not any particular formulation of glass. It's to do with the optical quality of it, the sort of perfection of the glass, the lack of distortion. I suppose the way that my work has developed, it's been a kind of to do with both the ideas, but it's also to do with because glass is there's a lot of technique involved, the sort of coming together of those different elements. I'm really following my own train of thought. It gradually evolves, and then sometimes a big shift, like when I started doing the colour saturation work, which are these very intensely coloured red pieces. I took a few months off about 3 years ago. I went on a sailing trip to the Azores, and so a lot of time to myself, sort of headspace that I don't normally get in my day-to-day life because I'm really busy all the time. And I have to say I wasn't really thinking about planning a new series of work while I was doing that, but somehow the fact that my mind was quite clear of work related things, and when I came back I just really had to do something new, and the way that kind of creative process works is a bit mysterious, but it's like it's something that has to be given space, headspace to develop, and it's something that for me I find I can't really force it, I can't sort of make it happen. I was kind of looking for a new source of ideas, of actual forms to work on. I had a grant from the Arts Council as well for a sort of research grant to explore new directions, which was great. It meant that I kind of had to, I stopped making things and sort of went out looking instead, which is what I feel is really important to do. So they were restoring Gloucester Cathedral. I mean, it's fabulous. It's, one of the really fine cathedrals in this country. It's really, really beautiful. They gave me permission to go up on their scaffold and take silicon moulds and bits of medieval stonework and so on. And so that then, took those back into the studio, and that gives me a starting point. I did a whole series of pieces based on that. So that's a kind of a very typical process for me, that I'll go somewhere or find some objects that I like and make rubber moulds of them, and then use that, and then sort of put it on my bench and kind of look at it and think, well, what can I do with this? And sometimes I can't think of anything to do with it. Sometimes I have moulds knocking around for years. What I don't do is to just simply draw something and then set about making it.
That was incredible as I remember it being. So thank you for sharing that again, Colin.
Well, it's nice to see it. It was a little bit jerky seeing it here, but it's quite poignant actually. That last couple of shots with our old Jack Russell. He died a few years ago. He was my companion at work for many years.
Gotcha. What was his name?
Matty.
Oh, great. That was it just goes to show like how many steps you've had to develop in your techniques over the years. Like every little step you do along the way, you've had to figure out. It's just great seeing the whole orchestration come together. Do you still have the same assistant?
Yeah, Karen. She's been with me for 18 years now, or something like that. She's fantastic, and she's a very successful artist in her own right as well. So she works part-time for me, and she does her own work. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to see just what an incredibly messy looking process it is. Pieces are kind of so immaculate and pristine when you see them finished, but what goes into them is far from.
Yeah, they're it's magic to see them and see you cover as you're going from process to process, the steps that you take and the care that you take to get from, I guess, A to Z. And there's stuff I still don't understand, but I'm sure I'll get it sooner or later on how you take a flip. It looks like you took the last piece there and you encased it entirely in plaster, but it was wax. So you must have a way of putting the glass on the reverse mold, but it looked like it was entirely encased. So I don't know. I guess I'll figure it out later. When I have questions later. But feel free to take over the screen now.
Okay.
See some of the fun slides you have lined up for all of us.
Okay, let's see.
Check the chat. Somebody asked while you're switching what kind of wax you use.
Yeah, it's microcrystalline wax. Let's see. Okay, so I think that gives a really good, it's easier to see some of these processes than to describe them. But so what I'm going to do now is talk through the development of my work really, and I'm going to talk about some commissions, because that's work that people don't often get to see because it doesn't go to a gallery or something, and it's broadly chronological, but not entirely, because sometimes I'm sort of jumping back and forth. But I will essentially start at the beginning when let's see, I mentioned that my introduction to glass was as a lamp work through scientific glass blowing, and I always intended to use it to do something more creative. But basically, I trained to make stuff like this when I was much younger, and in the 1970s. And I worked in the industry for a while to sort of, to develop the skill. And then I started trying to make my own work. So I developed a range of perfume bottles, which I was selling. So it was really production lamp work, but making my own designs, selling them in small galleries. And this was in the late 70s. I knew nothing about the contemporary glass movement that was just sort of starting to take off, but gradually became aware of it. And I realized I was intrigued by glass. I didn't want to go on working on such a small scale as is possible with lamp work. And so I actually went back to college and did a degree in glass design. That was at Stourbridge College of Art, which was really one of the best courses in the UK at the time. And I quite quickly got into casting, and this rather humble object is the first thing that I cast in glass. And I immediately was able to see things that interested me about it. For example, casting was good at form, unlike blowing, which is good at sort of making shiny, fluid shapes and hollow things. Casting was better at solid and at form and at texture. And it was the other thing that when you started to cold work it, and that was essential to sort of start to grind the surface back, polish it so you could see what was going on inside it, you started to reveal this incredible kind of movement. So there was this sort of inner space that you could work with as well. And so those are the kind of key things that attracted me to casting, which is basically what I've pursued ever since. So it was really quite a significant moment making this little piece. And then the other thing that I realised was that I wanted, it's good for casting texture. Where is the best source of texture in nature? And so I started casting. This was it was literally a molehill in the fields near where I lived, and just pouring. I started going out into nature and pouring plaster of Paris on things, unlikely things like this, and taking it back into the studio, and just ending up with this incredible resource of texture. And so this is the kind of work that starts to come out of it. So I've been working on making perfume bottles to make a living. So this is actually a cast perfume bottle using texture of sand, and then the top, that's the top, that fits on. So it's the two pieces fit together, and working really with the interior space of the glass as well. So this was an early piece made in probably the early 1980s. And then I started to try and go up in scale, and as Aaron was saying, like the techniques weren't really developed then. We had to kind of figure it out for ourselves, what molds would work, and there was a lot of trial and error involved. This piece was actually the first piece I sold. Well, the George and Dorothy Sachs bought this, which was amazing for me at the time. And sadly, it was destroyed in the San Francisco earthquake. But given the nature of the piece, this sort of rending apart of the two elements, I think it was quite a sort of, there was something quite fitting about it. It had to come to grief, but it happens in an earthquake. And I started working with, this is probably sort of mid-80s. I made this piece around the time my first daughter was born, and it was kind of connected with that. But also an interest in symbols, not specifically in the meaning of the symbols, but in the fact that certain forms we seem to resonate with us, so they recur throughout human society and history, and we connect with them. I'm interested in forms like that seem to have some kind of attraction and resonance. And the arch, which has also been a form in architecture since very early times. And I started working with characters from text as well, particularly after I was showing in Japan for the first time, and it was absolute revelation to be in a country where I couldn't understand the text. It was just abstract form, and it really made me stop and look at what, how finely developed those forms are, because they're so used and honed over such a long period of time. And then in the early 90s, I went to New Zealand for a year for a fabulous residency, and there I was surrounded by, well, obviously the opposite side of the world, but oceanic, Polynesian, Maori art was everywhere, and so I really looked at it and was very inspired by it. So I started making pieces that were kind of referred to that, to the sort of forms I was seeing, and also incorporating basalt. Because Auckland, where I was working, is basically built on basalt, so it's everywhere. It's very ubiquitous material, and it's quite similar to work to glass, not in terms of melting it, but cold working it, cutting it, and so on. And so these pieces incorporated basalt. Then when I came back to the UK in the 90s and started working, I started to get interested in optical glass. And I really started, once I started working with it, I've never stopped, because it's such a wonderful material. I was saying in the video, it's not that it's any particular formulation, but it's its optical purity, which is what makes it special. And so it really influenced what I was making, because it had these amazing optical qualities. So pieces like this, the coloured part on the right is actually transparent. What you're seeing is a reflection of the colour which is on the base of the piece. So that's total internal reflection. And so it's quite kinetic as you move around the piece. That changes and shifts. And I referred in the video to some funding I got where I worked at Gloucester Cathedral. So this is not too far from where I live. And the cathedral was all covered in scaffold, so I was able to get access to this lovely stonework. and used that as the basis for a series of pieces. So I was taking the forms of the medieval carving and casting it in rubber, and then making waxes, and then starting to manipulate that to make my own forms, but incorporating the detail from the stone. This is a piece called Through a Glass Darkly, which was from that series, and it was nice that this was actually exhibited in Gloucester Cathedral in a sculpture exhibition a few years later. So I was starting to really work with found objects and forms that I could bring into the studio, make molds from. So in this case, it was parts of cellos, violins, and casting details on them, and then building up the form and casting it in glass. And I sort of set myself a challenge, because I was working so much with these gorgeous things like, you know, ancient stone and natural forms, to go and see what I could do if I looked for something in the supermarket. So I went to the local supermarket and, you know, wandered around thinking, what could I cast in here? And I came across these things, cream horns, which I then cast in plaster, and you can see they come out looking very sort of like sea forms when they're cast in glass. And I like that. There's something quite sort of, it's quite abstract, but it is actually referring to something very figurative.
And quite delicious.
Yeah, not after I finished with them. This is actually the piece that I was working on in the video, so it would be nice to show what the finished piece looked like. I was carving the this lens here, and it's been gilded with, I think, 22 karat gold, and it looks as if it's floating. It's actually, this is solid glass across here. It's quite thick, but because it's optical glass, you literally can't see it. You're just looking straight through it to the form on the underside. And this is one of the series of book pieces. I've worked around the form of books, stacks of books, quite a lot, because it's something that I really enjoy. It's something that's important to me in my life, and I like the kind of reference that books aren't just objects. They contain information, knowledge, experience, stories, and it's sort of, I like the reference to all of that that these pieces make. And this was actually lovely that it was commissioned by Trish Duggan for the Imagine Museum in Florida, which was really nice. So I got a chance to make a bigger one. This is about 3 feet high. And so I'll just talk about a few commissions now. This was a commission that I did for Shanghai Public Library, and it's a text-based piece. So that, again, it picked up on things that I'm interested in working with. And I worked with a Chinese person, because obviously I don't speak Mandarin. And it was based on the early form of Chinese book before the invention of paper, where they used strips of bamboo and inscribed the characters on them, and then bound them together into a kind of scroll. So it's called bamboo scroll. It's about probably about 12 feet high, and it's on a plinth in the sort of central area of when you go into the library. And this was a private commission for somebody in London that wanted a piece to go in their garden. So it's blown glass. I didn't blow it, so I commissioned a blower, and it's blown glass on a stainless steel armature, and it's quite mobile. It sort of moves around when it's windy, and it's weathered really nicely in the garden. Actually, it's been there for quite a long time now. And another commission, this is Burton Agnes, which is an Elizabethan stately home, and they had a burglary, and they lost their collection of Sèvres porcelain. And when they got the insurance money, they decided that instead of going out and buying more antiques, they would commission contemporary work. And so I got the lovely commission to go and basically wander around the place and take inspiration from what attracted me. And so I like this slightly kind of mad-looking figure that was carved above the gateway, and I made this piece. So you can see this is the face, and this is her hair, and yeah, I really enjoyed that actually. And then another commission. This is an apartment in Paris in the centre, but in one of the very old quarters, and it was really semi-derelict. And the client asked me to go around when he first got it, when nothing had been done to it. He wanted something in this room because the window looked out onto a roof, so he didn't really want to be able to see the view out of the window, but he wanted light to come in. And I just thought that these old net curtains was something very kind of moody about them. I just liked them, so I thought, well, I'll use that image. And I went out and actually borrowed my mum's old sewing machine and went out and bought some fabric and made some curtains and then cast them. So this is the wax impression of them, and this is the finished piece. So they look very light, and they actually were extremely heavy, and there's on these sort of bronze fittings to hold them up. But it's quite a sort of playful piece, because when you first go into the room, you look at it and you think curtains, but then you realise that actually it's not fabric at all. It's cast glass. And this is the Eden project in Cornwall in southwest England, which is each of these domes is a biome. So there's a rainforest one, a temperate one, and so on. So I worked in the rainforest biome, and I was casting all these giant leaves, not really knowing what I was going to do with them. I just thought they were gorgeous forms, and developed. This is actually in my retrospective in Cheltenham Museum and Art Gallery. It's these are the plaster casts, so they're quite big. They're sort of 3 feet or so high, each of these. And then I started making them into tables. So this particular one is actually available at the moment. It's on a flame cut steel base, which has been patinated, and it's quite a nice combination of materials. And then Chatsworth House, which is a really beautiful property in the north of England, they have their own tropical houses, and so the Duke of Devonshire asked if I would make a piece for him from one of his own banana palms, which is this piece. So that again was a very nice commission, and I've made a similar piece for Madrid Museum. It's about 5 feet long, and quite a chunk of glass actually. So this is I said in the video that it's in 2009, I think. I went off on for several months. My other sort of real passion is sailing, and I sailed alone from the UK, southwest, where I used to keep my boat down here in Falmouth, out to the Azores, which is many people have done much more adventurous voyages than that, but for me, doing that alone was really quite a challenge, and it was a most amazing feeling. This is landfall in the Azores after, I don't know, 8 days alone at sea. I actually went by northern Spain like that. It was just an incredible experience, and it really, when I came back, I was in a different place, and I wanted to really sort of make a new move with my work. So I went up to Northlands, which is right up here. It's Northlands Creative Glass. It's the most fantastic and inspirational centre for courses, workshops. They have good studios and facilities, and it's in the most stunning location. And I did a workshop with Udo Zembok, who also shows with Habatat, and he works with colour. And he introduced me to some new materials, and it took me a couple of years once I got back into my own studios, figuring out what to do with them. But they're used mostly for architectural glass, so for flat pieces. But I wanted to actually cast with these colours, and this was the sort of piece that I came up with. So they're fairly simple forms. I'm really interested in the intensity of colour and the movement of colour, what happens when it's molten, how it tells the story of kind of its creation as a molten material, and working with really quite simple forms. I think that simpler forms can be the stronger forms, and I think there's always a sort of temptation to complicate and I think staying with a simple form like this is really has worked for me. So you can see this gorgeous kind of colour that I started working with. And then this is the piece, this is actually the piece that is the backdrop for Aaron. So this is in Habatat Galleries at the moment. And it also possible to mix colours, to combine them, and they change as you mix different colours together. You end up with a third colour. And this is the piece that I was working on in the video. So this is the exhibition. What's nice about this is also it does lend itself to working at scale. So there's probably, I don't know, 80 kilos or something, quite a substantial piece of glass. And this is a similar form, but with a complete sort of development of the colour. So this was actually made for an exhibition which over the last couple of years I've had shows in Liuli Museum Taipei in Taiwan and in Liuli Museum Shanghai. This is the opening in Shanghai, and actually this piece is now available at Habatat. So it's quite a substantial piece, and it's what I've really enjoyed is finding how these different colours are combined to make. In fact, the black is a combination of red and white, and it transformed during the firing. And this piece was also in the exhibitions in Taiwan and China. It's called Sail. So this is another commission. The client asked me if I would make a piece. We decided to call it Family Tree because his concept was that him and his wife and their children and their grandchildren numbered 16. He wanted a piece that had 16 elements to represent his immediate family, and we had the idea of Family Tree. And so this is the form that I developed. It's quite a long process to get to this. And but there you can see there's 4 times 4, so there's 16 elements to it. I was really praying that he didn't have any more grandchildren during the process of making it, which really complicated things. And then he wanted colour. He wanted a sort of a vibrant piece, and the technique I've been using really does lend itself to colour. So we were thinking, okay, how are we going to approach the colour? And then actually I was sitting in the kitchen with my partner, and we had a vase of tulips on the table, and she pointed at that and said, well, how about that? And we talked about it and thought, yes, that's perfect. That gives us the sort of palette that we're looking for. So these are some of the details of some of the finished elements, and that's the finished piece. So it sits in a central courtyard in the centre of the house. It's 6 feet high, so it's person sized. It's about 600 or 700 kilos of glass. It was quite a substantial piece. And as well as working on these colour saturation pieces, I'm working on two threads at the moment, and have been, where I'm continuing to work with optical glass and working with figurative objects and then sort of translating them into glass. And so this was a visit to Birmingham Fish Market to see if I could find anything there that I would like to work with. And this is the piece that came out of it. So this is called Shoal of Roach, and you can see there each of these is a little fish. And then another piece that I worked on was, as I drive to my studio every morning, I pass I live in the countryside, so one of the farms that I go past had a field of sunflowers, and I was just looking at them and everything, thinking, well, I'd love to work with that. So when it got to the end of the season and they were dying back, and it was just these amazing seed heads, I went and asked if I could have some of them, and I cast them, and this is what came out of it. So think of that sort of Fibonacci sequence that occurs in nature, which I was able to get in this, was something that really interests me.
Really beautiful.
And thank you. And this one it's also is we were walking in the mountains in Tenerife, and found these beautiful plants that grow there, which are then I have this lovely kind of portable silicone material that I'm able to use to to cast in things in situ, so I can sort of grab impressions of things if I find them. And so this is called Casa Forestal because it's taken after the name of the walk that we were on. And just the last few shots of what I'm doing now. These are more kind of saturation pieces, but I'm working with this concave shape, so I'm casting over a dome. You can see on the left here how the piece is put together. So there's probably 70 or 80 individual pieces of glass. They're all cut to fit, they're numbered, they're taken out, the color is applied, they're put back in again, and then over here what it looks like when you open the kiln and it's all melted. So the piece looks something like that. So you've got this very thin edge here, and it's sort of the curve follows round, and then it's quite much more substantial on the outer edge. And finally, the piece that I've been working on during lockdown is called Enclosed, and this is it was such a strange experience that I think all artists and everybody generally suddenly everything stopping when lockdown first started in 2020, and it completely affected what I wanted to make. So this, I just had a lot of time at home because I wasn't at the studio for a while, and thinking about, well, how is this, how am I experiencing this? What's happening in the world? It's not just me, it's the whole planet that's going through this. So this piece kind of, it sort of picks up on all of that. It's these enclosed voids, these rather sort of Earth-like spheres, light and dark. There's a lot of connections that it makes. And the other thing, which is not really very obvious, is that a nice thing that happened during the first lockdown, when we were really strictly locked down, one of our neighbours came round and she gave to everybody in our little immediate group of houses a roll of toilet paper, because there was a massive shortage at the time, and a little bag of sourdough starter. And so we all started making bread, and it was just something quite, having time at home during the day to do something as simple as make bread was actually something really pleasurable. And so on the inside of this, which you can't really see, is sourdough recipes and names of different types of bread. So that's pretty much where I am now. So that's the end of my title. Thank you very much.
Colin, that was great. I'm gonna have you stop sharing your screen. I can probably do it too. Kick it out for me. That was very enlightening. It's nice to see the bodies of work. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned slightly about the scale. Is there a limit to your scale? Because that was pretty impressive, making 6 tall pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, there is. I mean, the kiln I was using, I've actually changed my kiln since then, but it was 2.1 meters. So I mean, if it's going to be cast in one, it's got to fit in the kiln in one piece. But the other approach is to make pieces in components, so that you can make more. You just build up a piece so you can go up in scale like that. And physically, I mean, we use lifting gear a lot, but there is a limit to how big I would want to go. Really, it doesn't get any easier as you get older. We try to avoid lifting as much as possible, but you can't avoid it entirely.
I can imagine that. And then I had a question about that new body of work that was lens-like.
Yeah.
That must have been a learning process, because the temperature is different than a solid piece. That's the same scale for the entire piece. Was there a lot of adjustment you had to do for that body of work? You
mean the very final piece I was showing? The one before that. Yeah.
Before that, where he has the lens.
Yeah. No, it's broadly similar. It's a kind of a development of what I was doing before. So it's sort of using I'd say that each piece you have to adjust the firing and get it right for that particular thing. And if you get it wrong, you know about it, because the piece is cracked. Luckily, that doesn't happen too often. But yeah.
Good to know, because it looked quite impressive. If anybody has other questions, feel free to unmute yourself now. This is very informal, so go ahead and click your little button. It's been great to talk to Colin. It's great to have you here. And it was a great presentation. I learned a lot about, the bodies of work I was familiar with, and then the commissions you just took and had fun with. Early on, we got a question about your earlier work. Like, what was the scale of your earlier pieces when you first started with class?
To start with, probably the first slide of the perfume bottle with the little top that lifted off is probably, I don't know, maybe 8 inches, something like that, 6 to 8 inches, quite small. It's very slender. And then when I started working with like the piece that I said got broken in the earthquake, is probably maybe 18 inches, and also the spiral. And really, I was sort of pushing it at the time with the materials that we're using and the mold mixes and so on. It was all very experimental, and there was a lot more failure back then because we hadn't figured out. Oh, I can see.
I thought you'd like to take a look at this. This is one of those early pieces.
Oh yeah. That's nice
Thank
to
you,
see.
John.
Thank you.
We have a plethora of people who have your work, and it's great.
Yeah.
Showed it out of nowhere. They had a question about you working with somebody. I know you work with one person. You always work with one person? Do you work with more people? What is your average day like?
Oh, you mean in terms of assistants?
Yeah, in terms of assistants.
Yeah, I have. I've always had one assistant, and because they have to learn my processes, and it takes time, and everything, because everything that I do is, I don't do every stage of the making, but I have to initiate everything, and certain key parts of it I want to do myself. I'm very hands-on with my work, so there's only so much of it that I want to hand over to somebody else, and so I couldn't actually keep more than one person busy, because otherwise I would feel under pressure to be making stuff faster than I need time to develop work myself. And I have a part-time assistant, and then another studio assistant who also comes in part-time, who's got very good at some of the cold work. I've got 2 part-time people at the moment, but we're not all there full-time. The studio's quite busy, but we sort of come and go. So it's
good to know. And then just for the sake of it, the body of work behind me that I have here, and I know it was the work that you started working with Udo Zembach that showed you the glass. Is there I know you number the artwork, but is there a name to this body of work?
that particular piece is Nautilus.
Right, but I mean, like you have the optical glass with the object.
Oh yeah, yeah. So those pieces with that intense color, I call that color saturation. Okay. For all of that body of work. Yeah.
Good to know. And the other works are optical.
Yes, optical. Yeah.
Good to know. That's great, and that helps me with understanding and explaining, which is great. There is a collection of work available. Many of you saw it in the email that we have here at Habatat, and obviously Colin's up for commissions. If you have any ideas, we'd love to talk to you about it. It's been a great part of our Habatat family for decades now, and we've seen him in our Chicago shows at SOFA, and we've had him at our internationals. So this is a great honor to have you, Colin, for this event virtually throughout the. See people from all over the world joining in today. So
yeah, thank you. I actually, when I was putting it together, I was kind of thinking, well, actually, I've been showing with Habatat for longer now than any other gallery. I think since sometime in the 80s. Was that right, Third?
Deserve an award for that. Make a gold watch. We'll send you a gold watch for 30 years, if not more, 40 years, which is wild. And we'll be celebrating our 50th of our international this upcoming April, and we celebrated the gallery last year in September. So amazing legacy, Ferd, for that. Thanks for joining us. I see Ferd's here also. Everybody's saying thank you so much, Colin, via the chat, and everybody really enjoyed this, and myself. I will be posting this on YouTube, so feel free to share it with anybody who may feel interest. And there's a whole bunch of videos out there we've been doing since last 2 years now, I guess, as we've been going through the world in Zoom, as we all have. So thank you again, Colin. I will send you a copy of this.
Thank you.
Interest, feel free to email me, unmute yourself, and say goodbye.
Again, thank you everybody for coming. It was great.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Happy
That
Valentine's
was
Day.
great. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Great work.
All right, be well, everybody. Take care.